There is something arriving right now that you have been trained to dismiss before it lands. Not because it isn't real, because if it is real, if even a fraction of what you're about to look at is actually happening, then the story you've been telling yourself about the nature of reality, about what's possible, about who you are and what is watching you back, that story doesn't survive the encounter. And some part of you already knows this. Some part of you felt something shift the moment you saw those words. Not excitement. Something quieter than that. Recognition. That's what we're going to look at today. Not the Pleiades as a concept, not channeling as a belief system, not the quantum field as a metaphor that makes spiritual ideas sound scientific. We're going to look at all of it directly, precisely, without the comfortable distance of either belief or dismissal. Because here's what most people do when they encounter a claim like this. They either grab it and run with it, filling it with every hope they've ever had, or they reject it immediately and feel smart for doing so. Both of those are ways of not looking. Both of those are ways of letting the thing pass through you without actually seeing it. You're here because you're willing to do something harder than either of those. You're here to watch. And what you're going to find when you watch this carefully, when you look at the actual mechanics of what it means for a quantum field to carry information, when you look at what the Pleiades actually are, and what human beings have actually reported experiencing in relation to them across thousands of years of unconnected cultures. When you look at what happens in your own nervous system when you encounter what feels like a transmission, you're going to find something that neither the believers nor the skeptics are willing to see. You're going to find that the question itself is the wrong question, and the right question, the one underneath it, is the one that changes everything. Let's begin by looking at what you actually know. You know that the universe is not made of solid matter. This is not philosophy. This is the consensus of modern physics, confirmed repeatedly since the early 20th century. The atom, which was supposed to be the indivisible building block of reality, turns out to be almost entirely empty space. And the particles that do exist within it don't behave like particles at all when no one is measuring them. They behave like waves. Probability distributions. Clouds of potential that extend through space without a definite location until the moment they are observed. This is the measurement problem. This is what quantum mechanics actually says, not as a metaphor, not as a spiritual interpretation, but as the literal mathematical description of physical reality at its most fundamental level. Before measurement, a particle exists in superposition, meaning it is not in one state or another. It is in all possible states simultaneously, each with a certain probability. The act of measurement, the interaction of a measuring device with the system being measured, causes what physicists call wave function collapse. The probability cloud resolves into a single outcome. One state is selected, the rest vanish. Now here is where it gets precise, because most people who talk about the quantum observer effect in spiritual contexts make a specific error. They say that consciousness collapses the wave function, that your awareness, your intention, your observation as a subjective experience is what determines which outcome manifests. And then physicists push back and say, no, the observer in quantum mechanics doesn't mean a conscious being, it means any physical interaction that constitutes a measurement. A photon detector observes, a molecule observes. Consciousness isn't required. Both of these positions are partially right, and both of them are missing something. What the physicists are correct about, the mathematics of wave function collapse does not require a conscious mind. Any physical interaction that constitutes a measurement will do it. You don't have to be aware for the collapse to happen. What the spiritual interpreters are pointing at, even if they're pointing imprecisely, consciousness is itself a physical process. Your nervous system is made of atoms. Your neurons are quantum systems. The electrochemical processes in your brain involve quantum-level events. The question of whether consciousness plays a special role in quantum mechanics is not settled. It is one of the most actively debated questions in the foundations of physics. There are serious physicists, not fringe figures, working on interpretations of quantum mechanics in which consciousness is not incidental to the measurement process, but central to it. The Copenhagen interpretation, the many worlds interpretation, the relational interpretation, cubism, each of these handles the observer differently, and none of them has one. So when someone tells you that your observation collapses quantum probability into manifest reality, they might be wrong about the mechanism, but they are not obviously wrong about the direction. The relationship between consciousness and the physical world at the quantum level is genuinely, provably, measurably unresolved. That's not a belief, that's the current state of physics. And that matters for what we're about to look at. Because the moment you understand that the quantum field is not a metaphor, but a literal description of the substrate of physical reality, and that the relationship between observation and that substrate is genuinely open, you can no longer dismiss the idea that consciousness interacts with the field in ways we don't fully understand. You can question the specifics, you can demand precision, but you cannot honestly close the door. Look closer. Here's something that the popular conversation about quantum mechanics almost never includes, and its absence is doing real damage to the quality of the inquiry. The quantum field is not one field. It is a collection of overlapping fields, each corresponding to a different type of particle or force, and these fields permeate all of space simultaneously. The electron field is everywhere. The photon field is everywhere. The Higgs field, which gives particles mass, is everywhere. You are not moving through empty space punctuated by particles. You are moving through a dense, layered, continuously active structure of overlapping fields, and the particles that make up your body are not objects sitting in that structure, but excitations of it. Disturbances, patterns of activity in a medium that has no gaps. This changes the picture significantly. Because if you are not a collection of particles in empty space, but a pattern of excitation in a continuous field, then the question of where you end and the rest of the universe begins is not as clear as it appears. The boundary of your body is a useful approximation. It is not a fundamental fact about reality. At the level of the fields themselves, there is no hard edge. There is a region where the pattern that constitutes you is dense and coherent, and then there is a gradient, and then there is the rest of the field, which is continuous with you in a way that your ordinary perception does not register. That is not a spiritual claim. That is the structure of quantum field theory, which is the most precisely tested physical theory in the history of science. Its predictions match experimental measurements to more than 10 decimal places. And what it describes is a universe in which you are not separate from the field. You are a feature of it. Now hold that and look at what we're about to look at together. If this kind of looking is something you want more of, subscribe and like this video so it reaches the people who are ready to do it. The Pleiades, 7 stars, or 6, depending on how clear the sky is and how sharp your eyes are. The Pleiadian star cluster sits in the constellation Taurus, approximately 444 light-years from Earth. That number is worth sitting with. 444 light-years. The light reaching your eyes from those stars tonight left them during the early 17th century, around the time Galileo was being tried by the Inquisition for suggesting that the Earth moved around the Sun. You are not seeing those stars as they are. You are seeing them as they were 4.5 centuries ago, their light traveling across the void, arriving at your retina right now. That's not a metaphor. That's the actual physics of starlight. But here's what almost no one in either the spiritual community or the scientific community stops to look at directly. The Pleiades are not just a cluster of stars that humans happen to find beautiful. They are one of the most universally significant celestial objects in the entire history of human civilization. Across cultures with no contact with each other, across thousands of years, in ways that are genuinely difficult to explain. The Aboriginal Australians have detailed Pleiadian mythology that is at least 10,000 years old, possibly much older. The Maori of New Zealand call them Matariki and built their entire agricultural calendar around them. The ancient Greeks named them and told stories about them. The Lakota Sioux have Pleiadian traditions. The Aztec calendar was oriented around the Pleiades. The ancient Egyptians aligned certain temples to the Pleiades. The Japanese call them Subaru, and that word is so culturally embedded it became the name of a car company whose logo is 6 stars. The ancient Sumerians, the Babylonians, the Chinese, the Persians, the Celts, the Hindus, all of them, independently across the span of human civilization, assigned the Pleiades a significance that went beyond navigation, beyond agriculture, beyond the practical reasons you might track a star cluster. They said it was a place of origin. They said it was where something came from. Now, you have a choice right now about how to look at this. You can look at it through the lens of cultural diffusion and say that these traditions spread along migration routes and trade networks. That's a legitimate hypothesis for some of them, but it cannot account for all of them. The Australian Aboriginal traditions are among the oldest continuous cultures on Earth, and their Pleiadian mythology predates any possible contact with the Mediterranean or the Americas. The convergence is too wide, too ancient, too consistent in its themes to be explained entirely by cultural borrowing. You can look at it through the lens of cognitive universality and say that human brains are wired to find patterns in the sky, and the Pleiades are visually distinctive enough to attract attention everywhere. That's also true, but it doesn't explain why the specific themes, origin, ancestry, the place where we came from, recur so consistently across traditions that had no contact with each other. Or you can look at it with the question genuinely open and ask, what if there is something about the Pleiades that human consciousness has been responding to for longer than recorded history? Not as a belief, as a genuine investigative question. What would it mean? What would it look like? And what does it mean that you, right now in the 21st century, are watching a video about a Pleiadian message? What drew you here? Don't answer that quickly. Sit with it as an observation, not an explanation. Because here's what I want to show you about messages, about transmission, about what it actually means for information to travel through a field. In 2008, a physicist named Nicolas Guissin and his team at the University of Geneva conducted an experiment that should have been front-page news everywhere and was barely noticed outside the physics community. They entangled pairs of photons and sent them down optical fibers to detectors in 2 villages in Switzerland, Satigny and Jussy, 18 kilometers apart. When they measured the photons at both ends simultaneously, the correlations between the measurements were instantaneous. Not fast, instantaneous. Whatever happened at one end was reflected at the other end with no time delay whatsoever. This is quantum entanglement. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance, and he hated it. He spent years trying to prove it was an artifact of incomplete theory. He was wrong. The correlations are real. The instantaneity is real. Two particles that have interacted are connected across any distance in a way that defies the speed of light, defies the ordinary notion of space, and cannot be used to send classical information, but cannot be explained by any local mechanism either. The universe has non-local structure. This is not a belief. This is a measured, replicated, peer-reviewed experimental fact. Now watch what that means. If two particles that have interacted remain connected across space with no time delay, then the universe is not a collection of separate objects that interact through forces. It is a single interconnected field in which separation is, at some level, an approximation. A useful approximation for most practical purposes, but not the deepest truth about what's there. And if the universe is a single interconnected field, then the question of whether information can travel through that field in ways we don't fully understand is not obviously absurd. It is a genuinely open question, not proven, not established, but not obviously absurd. This is the quantum field that the title of this video refers to, not a metaphor. The actual non-local, entangled probability wave structure of physical reality that physicists have been measuring since the 1920s and still do not fully understand. And here is the question I want you to hold. If consciousness is a process that occurs within this field, and if this field has non-local structure, and if human beings across 10,000 years and every inhabited continent have been reporting experiences of receiving something from the direction of the Pleiades, what is the most honest thing you can say about that? Not the most comfortable thing. The most honest thing. Let me go one level deeper into the entanglement before we move on, because there is a detail here that almost every popular account skips, and skipping it leaves you with an incomplete picture. The standard objection to using entanglement as a model for consciousness receiving information from distant sources is this: entanglement cannot be used to transmit information faster than light. This is true. If you measure your entangled particle and get a result, you cannot use that result to send a message to the person holding the other particle, because the results at each end appear random. The correlation only becomes visible when you compare notes through a classical channel which travels at or below the speed of light. So entanglement, the objection goes, cannot be the mechanism by which consciousness receives transmissions from across the cosmos. That objection is correct as stated, but it assumes the model being tested is a transmission model, one where a sender encodes information and a receiver decodes it. And that may not be the right model for what is actually being reported in contemplative and anomalous experience. The alternative model is not transmission, but resonance. Not a signal sent from one location to another, but a structural correlation between two systems that share a common origin or a common frequency. In this model, nothing is transmitted. Instead, two systems that are part of the same underlying field express a common pattern simultaneously, the way two tuning forks of the same pitch will both begin vibrating when one is struck. Not because the first sent a signal to the second, but because they are both embedded in the same acoustic medium and share a structural relationship to it. What if the experience of receiving, the experience of something arriving in consciousness that was not generated by the individual nervous system, is not a transmission from a distant sender, but a resonance phenomenon? What if consciousness, under certain conditions, in the witnessing state rather than the reactive state, becomes structurally correlated with patterns in the quantum field that are not local to the individual body? What if what feels like contact with something vast is the nervous system registering a resonance it is normally too noisy to detect? I am not asserting that this is what is happening. I am asserting that it is a coherent hypothesis that neither the mainstream scientific framework nor the popular spiritual framework is currently investigating with adequate precision. And the reason both frameworks are missing it is the same reason. They have already decided what the answer is before they have finished looking at the question. Let me show you something. Let me tell you about a woman named Mira. Mira was a researcher, not a spiritual seeker, not someone who read about channeling or star systems or quantum consciousness. She was a cognitive neuroscientist at a university in the northern part of a country that doesn't matter for this story, studying the default mode network, which is the brain's resting state activity, the patterns of neural firing that occur when you're not focused on a specific task, when your mind is wandering, when you're daydreaming. Mira had spent 6 years studying what the brain does when it's not doing anything in particular. And what she found over and over was that the default mode network was not random. It was not noise. It had structure. It had patterns that repeated. And those patterns were not just correlated with memory retrieval or self-referential thought, which was the standard explanation. They were correlated with something she didn't have a word for, a kind of receptivity, a state in which the brain seemed to be doing something that looked less like processing stored information and more like listening. She published carefully. She didn't use the word listening in her papers. She used phrases like increased sensitivity to environmental input and reduced suppression of low amplitude signals. But in her private notes, which she never published, she wrote something different. She wrote, "It is as if the resting brain is tuned to a frequency it does not generate itself." One night, working late in her lab, Mira was reviewing fMRI scans of subjects in deep default mode states. She had been at it for hours. The building was quiet. And something happened that she spent the next 3 years trying to explain and eventually stopped trying to explain and simply reported. She became aware of something, not a thought, not a memory, not a dream, something that arrived. She described it later as information that was already complete when it appeared, not assembled from pieces she already knew, but present all at once. The way you see a photograph, not the way you read a sentence. And what arrived in that moment, in that quiet lab, was not a visual image or a voice or anything she could easily categorize. It was a quality of attention, as if something was watching her with the same precision she had been applying to her data. As if the direction of the gaze had reversed, she sat with it. She didn't reach for her phone. She didn't try to record it or analyze it. She just watched it, the way she had trained herself to watch data, without interpretation, without premature conclusion, with the kind of patient, open attention that good science requires. And in watching it, she noticed something. The quality of the attention that seemed to be directed at her was not alien. It was not frightening, it was recognizable. It felt, she wrote, like being seen by something that had been watching for a very long time. She didn't know what to do with that. She still doesn't. But she stopped dismissing the experiences that her subjects reported during default mode research. She stopped filing them under artifacts or confabulation. She started asking different questions, not what is wrong with the brain that produces this, but what might the brain be doing when it produces this? That's the question. And here's why that story matters for what we're looking at today. The experience Mira had is not unique to her. It is not unique to mystics or meditators or people who have been primed by spiritual frameworks to interpret their experiences in cosmic terms. It is reported across cultures, across centuries, across wildly different contexts, with enough consistency in its core qualities that dismissing it entirely requires you to dismiss an enormous amount of human testimony without explanation. The qualities that recur, information that arrives whole rather than assembled. A sense of being watched or attended to by something with greater scope than ordinary awareness. A quality of recognition as if something long familiar is being remembered rather than encountered for the first time. And frequently in traditions that predate the modern era's awareness of the Pleiades as a star cluster, a directional quality, a sense that the attention is coming from somewhere specific. If you've had a moment like this, one where something arrived in your awareness that you didn't generate yourself, drop it in the comments. Not what you decided it meant, what it actually felt like when it landed. Now I want to be precise here. I'm not telling you that the Pleiadians are real in the way that the chair you're sitting in is real. I am not telling you that there are physical beings in a star system 444 light years away who are beaming messages to human consciousness through the quantum field. I am not asking you to believe that. I am asking you to look at something more interesting than belief. I am asking you to look at what you actually experience when you encounter what feels like a transmission, and to look at it honestly without the protective distance of either credulity or dismissal. Because here's what I have watched people do with experiences like Mira's and like the ones you may have had yourself, the ones you've probably filed under strange and moved on from. They either grab the nearest framework, Pleiadians, angels, spirit guides, higher selves, and use it to contain the experience and make it manageable. Or they reject the experience as a brain glitch and feel responsible for not being more rational. Both of those are ways of not looking. The experience itself, whatever its ultimate source, is real. Something happened. Your nervous system registered something. Your consciousness was affected. That is a fact, not a belief. The question of what caused it, what it means, where it came from, those are interpretive questions, and they deserve genuine investigation, not premature closure in either direction. Let's do something right now. Pause here. Not as a thought exercise, as an actual observation. Think of a moment when you received something, not a gift, not information you sought out. A moment when something arrived in your awareness that you hadn't generated yourself. A thought that seemed to come from outside your ordinary thinking, an image or a feeling or a knowing that was already complete when it appeared. You may have dismissed it, you may have rationalized it, but it happened. It's in your memory somewhere. Find it. Don't analyze it yet. Just locate it. Just let it be present in your awareness without reaching for an explanation. Notice what happens in your body when you let it be present without immediately filing it somewhere. Notice whether there's a quality of recognition that comes with it. Not the recognition of understanding, but the recognition of something familiar. Now notice who is doing the noticing. There is something in you that can hold that memory without collapsing into either belief or dismissal. Something that can simply watch it. That capacity, that witnessing awareness, That is what we're talking about when we talk about the observer. And that observer is the most important thing in this conversation. Because here is what the Pleiadian message tradition, across all its forms, across all the cultures that have carried it, actually points at. Not a specific set of instructions, not a cosmological map, not a hierarchy of beings with names and missions. The consistent core of what had been reported across traditions, across individuals, across centuries is this. There is a quality of attention available to human consciousness that is larger than the ordinary thinking mind. And that quality of attention, when it is accessed, when you slip into it rather than generating it, feels like contact with something that has been watching you for a very long time. That's the message, not the content, the quality. The Pleiadian traditions, in their most coherent forms, are not primarily about information from another star system. They are about a mode of consciousness, a way of receiving rather than generating, a state in which the ordinary chattering, planning, defending, narrating mind goes quiet, and something else becomes available. Something that feels, in the language of every tradition that has touched it, like remembering. And quantum mechanics, if we look at it honestly, gives us at least a partial framework for understanding why this might be more than metaphor. Here's what we know about information and fields. A field in physics is a physical quantity that has a value at every point in space. The electromagnetic field is a field. Gravity is a field. The quantum fields that underlie all matter and energy are fields. Fields carry information. They propagate changes. They allow distant parts of the universe to affect each other, sometimes instantaneously in the case of entanglement, sometimes at the speed of light in the case of classical fields. The brain is a system that exists within these fields. It generates electromagnetic fields of its own. It is sensitive to electromagnetic fields. The neurons that fire in your brain are quantum systems. The question of whether consciousness is purely a product of neural computation or whether it is in some way a field phenomenon, whether awareness itself has a field-like structure that extends beyond the skull, is not settled. There are serious researchers working on this. Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance hypothesis, whatever you think of its current status, has generated testable predictions. The Global Consciousness Project at Princeton has been collecting data on whether human consciousness has measurable non-local effects on quantum random number generators for decades. The results are contested, but the question is being asked with instruments. Bernardo Kastrup, a philosopher with a doctorate in computer science and another in philosophy, has published a rigorous case for what he calls analytic idealism. The position that consciousness is the fundamental substrate of reality, and that matter is what consciousness looks like from the outside. This is not New Age speculation. It is a technically sophisticated philosophical position that takes quantum mechanics seriously and argues that the hard problem of consciousness, which is the problem of why physical processes give rise to subjective experience, is only hard if you assume that matter is primary. If you flip the assumption and make consciousness primary, the hard problem dissolves. I'm not asking you to adopt that position. I'm asking you to see that the space of serious intellectual inquiry is wider than either the mainstream scientific consensus or the New Age framework acknowledges. And in that wider space, the question of whether human consciousness can receive information from sources beyond the individual nervous system is not obviously absurd. It is a question that deserves genuine looking. Now look closer. There is something you may have been avoiding in this conversation. Something that's been sitting in the background since the title of this video appeared in your feed. And I want to name it directly because avoiding it is costing you something. The thing you've been avoiding is this. You've had experiences that you cannot explain within the framework you've been given. Not dramatic experiences necessarily, not visions or voices or encounters with beings. Maybe just moments of knowing something before you could have known it. Moments of feeling accompanied by something larger than your own awareness. Moments when the synchronicities stacked up in ways that probability theory struggles to accommodate. Moments when you felt with a certainty that was not emotional but somehow structural, that you were being watched, that something was paying attention to you. And you filed those experiences somewhere. You put them in a drawer. You gave them a label that made them safe, either the spiritual label or the neurological label, and you moved on. Because the alternative, taking them seriously as data, actually investigating them with the same rigor and openness you'd bring to any other genuine inquiry, that would require you to revise your picture of reality. And revising your picture of reality is uncomfortable. Here's what I want you to see. The filing is the avoidance. The label is the avoidance. The certainty in either direction is the avoidance. The observer doesn't file. The observer watches. And what happens when you watch those experiences without filing them? When you hold them in your awareness without reaching for the label that makes them manageable, is that they start to reveal something. Not about the Pleiades necessarily, about the nature of your own consciousness, about the difference between the part of you that generates thoughts and the part of you that watches thoughts being generated. About the fact that there is a quality of awareness available to you that is not produced by your thinking mind, and that this quality of awareness is what every tradition that has ever touched the Pleiadian theme, or the angelic theme, or the higher self theme, or the cosmic consciousness theme is actually pointing at. The cosmological framework is the container. The awareness is the content. And the awareness doesn't need you to believe in the Pleiades to access it. It doesn't need you to reject them either. It needs you to stop filing your experiences and start watching them. Let me tell you about Kyle. Kyle was a skeptic. Not the casual kind, not someone who simply hadn't thought about these things, the committed kind. He had a degree in physics. He had read the literature on cognitive biases, on pattern recognition errors, on the neuroscience of mystical experience. He knew about temporal lobe activity and its relationship to feelings of presence. He knew about sleep paralysis and the experiences it generates. He had an explanation for everything, and he was miserable. Not because his explanations were wrong, because they were incomplete. Because every time he applied them, every time he successfully reduced an anomalous experience to a known mechanism, he felt something close out. A door that had been slightly open-shutting with a quiet, definitive click. He didn't notice this for years. He was too busy being right. The moment he noticed it, he was standing outside at night, looking at the Pleiades. He wasn't thinking about them. He was just outside. And they were there, and he looked at them the way you look at something familiar that you haven't really seen in a long time. And something happened in the looking. Not a vision, not a message, just a quality of attention. A stillness that was different from the ordinary stillness of a quiet night, as if the looking was being returned. His first response was immediate and practiced. Temporal lobe fluctuation, pattern recognition, emotional state affecting perception. He had the explanation ready before the experience had finished arriving. And then he caught himself. He watched himself reaching for the explanation. He watched the speed of it, the automaticity of it, the way the explanation was deployed not after investigation but instead of investigation. He watched himself using the explanation as a shield. And he asked himself for the first time with genuine honesty, what am I protecting? What was he protecting? He was protecting his picture of reality, because if something was actually happening in that moment of looking, if the quality of attention he felt was not generated by his own nervous system but received from something outside it, then the picture he had built over decades of careful intellectual work was not wrong exactly, but it was missing something enormous. And the thought of that, the thought of how much he might have been missing, was terrifying. He stood there for a long time. He didn't reach for his phone. He didn't start taking notes. He just watched the stars, his own reaction, the quality of the moment, the fear underneath the skepticism, the door that had been closing every time he explained something away. He let the door be open. He didn't decide to believe in Pleiadians. He didn't adopt a spiritual framework. He simply stopped protecting his picture of reality long enough to actually look at what was there. And what he found in the looking was not information from another star system. It was something more disorienting than that. He found that the part of him doing the looking, the awareness itself, the witness, did not feel like a product of his nervous system. It felt like something his nervous system was occurring within. The observer felt more fundamental than the observed. The watching felt more primary than the thing being watched. That's not a Pleiadian message. That's the oldest finding in the contemplative traditions of every culture on Earth. That's what the Upanishads are pointing at. That's what Meister Eckhart is pointing at. That's what the Zen masters are pointing at. That's what the Aboriginal elders are pointing at. That's what, if you look at them carefully enough, the Pleiadian transmission traditions are pointing at underneath the cosmological framework. The observer is not inside reality. Reality is inside the observer. And quantum mechanics, if you look at it honestly, does not contradict that. The measurement problem, the question of why observation collapses the wave function, the question of what constitutes an observer. These are not peripheral puzzles waiting to be tidied up. They are central. They are the thing the theory hasn't resolved. And one reason they haven't been resolved is that the framework assumes consciousness is inside the physical world, when the data might be pointing in the opposite direction. This is where I want to slow down, because this is the layer that most videos about Pleiadian messages and quantum fields never actually reach. They stay at the level of the cosmological story. They give you beings and missions and timelines and activations. And those stories might be meaningful. They might be pointing at something real. But they are not the thing itself. They are the container. The thing itself is the quality of awareness that becomes available when you stop generating and start receiving. When you stop narrating and start watching. When you stop defending your picture of reality and let reality show you what it actually is. And that quality of awareness, that receptive, witnessing, non-generating consciousness, is what the quantum field responds to. Here's why. When you are in reactive mode, when your nervous system is running its ordinary patterns of thought generation, emotional response, narrative construction, threat assessment, social calculation, you are, in quantum field terms, a very noisy system. You're generating a great deal of electromagnetic and electrochemical activity. You are, in a sense, broadcasting. And a system that is broadcasting is not optimally configured for receiving. When you shift into witnessing mode, When you drop out of the reactive narrating mind and into the observing awareness, something changes in the nervous system. The default mode network activates in a different way. The high-frequency beta waves that characterize active thinking give way to the slower alpha and theta waves associated with receptive, open awareness. The body's stress response quiets, the electrochemical noise decreases, and the system becomes, in measurable physiological terms, more sensitive to low-amplitude signals. This is not metaphor. This is what the neuroscience of meditation and contemplative states actually shows. The brain in a witnessing state is a different instrument than the brain in a reactive state. It is more sensitive, it is more open, it registers things that the reactive brain filters out. Now, what does it register? This is where honest inquiry has to hold the question open. We don't know the full answer. We know that people in deep meditative states report experiences that have consistent qualities across cultures and traditions. We know that some of those experiences include what feels like contact with something beyond the individual self. We know that the default mode network in those states shows patterns that look less like self-referential processing and more like what Mira called listening. We know that the quantum field is non-local and that the relationship between consciousness and that field is unresolved. We don't know if what is received in those states is information from other star systems. We don't know if the Pleiadian framework is a literal description of a literal reality or a cultural container for an experience that exceeds our current conceptual vocabulary. We genuinely don't know. But here's what I want you to look at. Here is the thing that neither the believers nor the skeptics are looking at directly. The experience of reception, the experience of something arriving in your awareness that you didn't generate, is itself a piece of data about the nature of consciousness. And that piece of data is being systematically ignored by the mainstream scientific framework, which assumes that all conscious experience is generated by the brain and systematically mishandled by the spiritual framework, which too quickly fills it with cosmological content before investigating the experience itself. You are being invited right now to do neither of those things. You are being invited to look at the experience itself, the quality of it, the structure of it, what it actually is, before you decide what it means. Let's do that. Here's a practice, not a meditation in the traditional sense. An observation. Find a moment of stillness. It doesn't need to be perfect stillness, just a reduction in the noise. If you're watching this in a quiet room, good. If you're not, that's fine too. Now, instead of trying to generate a state, instead of trying to feel something or achieve something or reach for an experience, I want you to simply notice what is already arriving. Not what you're thinking, what's arriving underneath the thinking, the sensory information that your thinking mind is currently filtering out, the quality of the space around you, the weight of your body, the sound texture of the room, the way the air feels on your skin. Don't interpret any of it, just watch it arrive. Now notice, where is the watching happening? Not in your eyes, not in your brain, not in the sense of a location inside your skull. Where is the awareness that is registering all of this? Try to find its edges. Try to find where it begins and ends. You can't find the edges. The awareness doesn't have edges in the way that objects have edges. It is not a thing among other things. It is the space in which things appear. That is the observer. That edgeless, locationless, generating nothing but receiving. Everything awareness. That is what quantum mechanics cannot fully account for. and what the contemplative traditions have been pointing at for thousands of years. And that is what the Pleiadian transmission at its most coherent is actually about. Not a message from another star system. A quality of consciousness that is available to you right now, that has always been available to you, that your ordinary reactive mind is continuously obscuring. The message is not content. The message is the quality of the receiving itself. Now look closer, because there is a layer underneath this that most people never reach. You've been told in various forms that there is a cosmic story happening, that humanity is at a turning point, that there are benevolent forces guiding the evolution of consciousness, that the Pleiades or the Sirians or the Arcturians or some configuration of cosmic beings are transmitting information to help humanity through a critical transition. You've heard this in various forms. Maybe you've believed some version of it. Maybe you've dismissed it. Here's what I want you to look at. Whether or not the cosmological story is literally true, something is happening with human consciousness right now that is measurable and real. The rate of contemplative practice adoption globally has accelerated dramatically in the last 30 years. Meditation, which was a marginal practice in Western culture in 1990, is now practiced by hundreds of millions of people. The neuroscience of contemplative states is one of the fastest growing areas of research. The philosophical questions about consciousness and its relationship to physical reality are being taken more seriously in mainstream academic philosophy than at any point in the last century. The crisis of meaning that characterizes this moment in history is driving millions of people toward the question of what consciousness actually is in a way that previous generations were not driven. Something is happening. You can describe it in the language of cosmic beings transmitting activations through the quantum field. Or you can describe it in the language of cultural and intellectual evolution responding to existential pressure. The description you choose is a framework. The phenomenon is real either way. And here is what that phenomenon requires of you, regardless of which framework you use to understand it. It requires you to stop reacting and start witnessing. It requires you to develop the capacity to hold your experiences, including the anomalous ones, including the ones that don't fit your current picture of reality, without immediately filing them under a label that makes them safe. It requires you to cultivate the observer state, not as a spiritual achievement, but as a practical capacity for honest inquiry. Because the quality of your observation determines the quality of what you see, and the quality of what you see determines the quality of what you can do with it. This is where quantum mechanics and the contemplative traditions converge, not in the loose metaphorical way that spiritual teachers sometimes invoke quantum physics, but in a precise and specific way. The observer is not passive, the act of observation is not neutral. When you observe something, you interact with it, you change it, not because you intend to, because interaction is what observation is. When you observe your own consciousness with the quality of attention we've been developing in this conversation, something changes. The reactive patterns that have been running automatically become visible. And what becomes visible can no longer run automatically. The moment you see the mechanism, you are no longer entirely inside it. You have a degree of freedom you didn't have before. That's not belief. That's the phenomenology of awareness. That's what happens when the observer turns its gaze inward with genuine precision. And here is the Pleiadian message, if you want to call it that. Here is what the traditions that have pointed toward those 7 stars across 10,000 years of human history have been trying to say, in the language available to each culture, in the cosmological framework that made sense within each context. You're not primarily a body with a mind. You are not primarily a story with a history. You are not primarily a collection of reactions and patterns and defenses and desires. You are, at your most fundamental, the awareness within which all of those things appear. And that awareness, that witnessing consciousness, is not generated by your nervous system. It is the space within which your nervous system occurs. When you access that space, when you drop out of the reactive generating mind and into the witnessing awareness, you are not receiving a transmission from somewhere else. You are returning to what you already are. You are remembering something that was never actually forgotten, only overlooked, only covered over by the noise of the reactive mind. And in that remembering, something that feels like contact with something vast becomes available. Not because something vast is reaching down to touch you, because you are already part of something vast, and the ordinary reactive mind is what makes you feel separate from it. The Pleiades are 444 light years away. The light from them is ancient. And human beings across every culture that has ever looked up at that cluster of 7 stars have felt something in the looking that exceeded ordinary stargazing, something that felt like recognition, something that felt like being seen. Maybe that's projection. Maybe it's the brain's pattern recognition systems finding meaning in light. Maybe it's cultural conditioning creating a self-fulfilling expectation. Those are all possible explanations, but maybe it's something else. Maybe the universe is not a collection of separate objects in empty space, and maybe the separation between your consciousness and the rest of reality is not as absolute as it appears from inside the reactive mind. Maybe the non-local structure of the quantum field means that consciousness can resonate with, can receive from, can be in contact with things that are not spatially adjacent. Maybe the 10,000 years of human beings feeling recognized by those 7 stars is data about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to the cosmos, not just a cultural artifact to be explained away. I don't know. And I want you to notice that I don't know, because the honest answer to most of the deepest questions about consciousness and reality is that we don't know. And the willingness to hold that not knowing without collapsing into either belief or dismissal is the observer state. That's what it actually is, not a spiritual achievement, not a special experience. The simple, honest willingness to look at what's there without immediately reaching for a label that makes it safe. That's what you're being asked to do right now. And here's what I want to say about
The word message. A message implies a sender, a receiver, and content. It implies intentionality, someone or something that chose to communicate something specific to someone specific. The Pleiadian message tradition, in its most literal forms, claims all of that. Beings with intention, transmitting specific content to specific receivers
at a specific time. I can't verify that. You can't verify that. No one can verify that with the tools currently available to us. But there is a different kind of message that doesn't require a sender with intention. There is the kind of message that a tuning fork sends to another tuning fork. Not intentional, not chosen, but real. When you strike a tuning fork and hold it near another tuning fork of the same frequency, the second one begins to vibrate. Not because the first one decided to communicate with it, because resonance is a physical phenomenon. Because the universe has structure, and that structure means that things of the same frequency affect each other. What if consciousness has frequencies? What if the quality of awareness you access in the witnessing state is a frequency that resonates with something in the structure of the cosmos? What if the feeling of contact, of recognition, of being seen by something vast is not a message sent by a being but a resonance phenomenon, the natural result of consciousness tuning itself to a frequency that the universe itself is vibrating at? That's not a belief I'm asking you to adopt. It's a question I'm asking you to hold. Because holding it honestly, without collapsing it into certainty in either direction, is the observer state. And the observer state is what this whole conversation has been building toward. Let's go one more layer deep. There is something that has been running in the background of this entire conversation that I want to name directly. Something that you've probably felt but may not have articulated. The reason this video exists. The reason you're watching it. The reason the Pleiadian transmission tradition exists and has existed for 10,000 years. The reason human beings keep looking up at those 7 stars and feeling something that exceeds ordinary stargazing. It's not information, it's not cosmological knowledge, it's not a mission or a timeline or an activation, it's longing. The longing to not be alone in the universe. The longing to be part of something larger than the individual self. The longing to be recognized not by other humans, not by institutions or systems, but by something that sees the whole of what you are, including the parts you hide from yourself, and finds it not lacking, but perfect. The longing to remember something you feel you've forgotten. The longing to belong not just to a family or a culture or a species, but to the cosmos itself. That longing is real. It is one of the most consistent features of human consciousness across every culture and every era. And it is not a weakness. It is not a neurological error. It is not something to be explained away or spiritually bypassed. It is data. It is data about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to reality. Because longing points toward something. Hunger points toward food. Thirst points toward water. The longing for cosmic belonging, the longing that the Pleiadian traditions and the angelic traditions and the mystical traditions of every culture are responding to, points toward something. And the most honest thing you can say about what it points toward is, we don't fully know yet. But the pointing is real, and the observer, the witnessing awareness that can hold that longing without immediately filling it with a story or a framework or a belief, is the thing that is most likely to actually see what it's pointing at. Because when you fill the longing with a story, you stop looking. The story becomes the answer, and the looking stops. And what you haven't looked at yet, what the longing is actually pointing at, remains unseen. When you hold the longing without filling it, when you let it be present in your awareness as an observation, rather than a problem to be solved, something happens. The quality of your attention changes. You become more open, more receptive. The noise of the reactive mind quiets, because the reactive mind is fundamentally about managing, and you stop trying to manage the longing. You started watching it. And in that watching, in that quality of open, receptive, non-generating awareness, something becomes available that wasn't available before. I can't tell you exactly what it is. I can tell you that it has been reported consistently across 10,000 years and every inhabited continent. I can tell you that it has qualities that recur, a sense of vastness, a sense of being held, a sense of recognition, a quality of knowing that is not assembled from pieces, but present all at once. I can tell you that the neuroscience of the states in which it is reported shows a specific pattern of brain activity that is distinct from ordinary waking consciousness. I can tell you that the quantum field is non-local and that the relationship between consciousness and that field is genuinely unresolved. And I can tell you that the moment you stop filling the longing with the story and start watching it, you are in the observer state. And the observer state is the most powerful position available to human consciousness, not because it controls anything, because it sees clearly. And clarity is the only force that transforms without resistance. Here's what I want you to do with everything you've looked at in this conversation. Don't adopt a belief. Don't reject a belief. Don't file this under spiritual content you found interesting. Don't file it under pseudoscience you found unconvincing. Watch what happened to you during this conversation. Watch what shifted. Watch what opened. Watch what you felt when I named the longing. Watch whether there's something in you that recognized it before your mind could analyze it. That recognition, that precognitive knowing, that quality of awareness that is faster and quieter and more certain than ordinary thought, that is the observer. That is what you are when you're not busy being what you think you are. And that observer, that witnessing awareness, is what the quantum field responds to, not because the field is conscious in the way you are conscious, though that question is genuinely open, but because the quality of your observation determines the quality of what you see. And the quality of what you see determines the quality of what you can do with it. The universe has been waiting, if that's the right word, for you to stop reacting long enough to actually look. Not at the Pleiades, at your own awareness, at the quality of consciousness that is available to you right now, in this moment, that is not generated by your thinking mind and is not dependent on any cosmological framework to be real. Look at that. Watch it. Don't explain it. Don't label it. Don't file it. Just watch and notice what happens when you do. Here's a final practice, the last observation of this transmission. Sit with this question, not as a thought to be answered, as a field to be inhabited. The question is, what is watching right now? Not who, what, not the name you call yourself, not the story you tell about yourself, not the beliefs you hold or the framework you use. What is the quality of awareness that is present right now, in this moment, receiving these words? Find it, not by thinking about it, by being it, by stopping the generation of thoughts long enough to notice the space in which the thoughts appear. That space, that awareness, that witnessing. That is what the Pleiadian traditions, at their most coherent, have been pointing at across 10,000 years of human history. Not beings in a star system. The quality of consciousness that becomes available when you stop reacting and start witnessing. The observer state, the most fundamental thing you are. And when you are that, when you inhabit that quality of awareness fully, without protecting your picture of reality, without filling the longing with the story, without reaching for the label that makes the experience safe, something happens that I cannot describe better than the traditions have described it. You feel recognized, not by something outside you, by the universe itself, looking at itself through your eyes. That's not a metaphor. That's the observer effect, applied to the deepest layer of reality available to human consciousness. What you observe, you change. What you avoid observing controls you. And what you are at your most fundamental is not something that needs to receive a message from the Pleiades. It is the awareness that has always already been in contact with everything. The witnessing consciousness that is not inside the universe, but the space in which the universe appears. You were never meant to look away from that, and now you've looked. But before we close this transmission, there is one more thing to look at directly. One more layer that has been present throughout this entire conversation, waiting for the right moment to surface. And this is the layer that will determine whether what happened here stays with you or fades the moment you close this video. The problem is not that you don't know how to access the observer state. You just demonstrated that you do. The problem is not that the quantum field is too abstract, or the Pleiadian traditions are too strange, or the neuroscience is too technical. You've moved through all of that with enough precision to hold the questions open. The problem, the real and specific problem, is what happens in the hours and days after a moment of genuine seeing. Watch this carefully. You have a moment of clarity. Something opens. The reactive mind goes quiet, and something larger becomes available. You feel the recognition, the quality of contact with something vast, the sense of being held by the cosmos rather than alone inside it. And then ordinary life resumes. The noise returns. The planning, the defending, the narrating, the managing. And the clarity doesn't disappear exactly, but it recedes. It moves to the back of your experience. And within a day, sometimes within an hour, you are back in the reactive state, and the observer state feels like something that happened to you rather than something you are. This is the most consistent feature of every contemplative tradition's practical teaching. Not the initial opening, but the return. Not the first glimpse, but the cultivation of the capacity to return to what you glimpsed without having to wait for another accidental moment of quiet. And here's what the Pleiadian transmission traditions, at their most practically useful, have always been pointing at underneath the cosmological content. Not a one-time activation, not a moment of contact that transforms you permanently without effort, a practice of return, a discipline of coming back to the observer state repeatedly, not because you lost it, but because the reactive mind is persistent, and the witnessing awareness, though it is more fundamental than the reactive mind, is subtler. It does not announce itself loudly. It does not compete for attention. It waits. The practice is learning to stop waiting for it to announce itself and instead learning to look for it actively, in the middle of ordinary moments, when nothing cosmic is happening, when the day is mundane and the mind is busy and there is no quiet lab and no night sky full of ancient light. What does that look like in practice? It looks like this. You are in a conversation that is irritating you. You notice the irritation. And instead of following the reactive pattern, instead of defending or withdrawing or escalating, you pause for a fraction of a second and ask, what is watching this irritation? Not to suppress it, not to analyze it, just to locate the awareness that is registering it, to step back from the content of the experience and into the witnessing of it. That fraction of a second is the return. That is the practice, not a formal meditation, not a retreat, not a cosmic event. A fraction of a second of genuine observation in the middle of ordinary life. And what happens when you do that consistently, when you make that fractional return to the observer state? A habit, rather than an accident, is that the quality of your entire experience begins to shift. Not because you are suppressing your reactions or achieving some spiritual state, because you are no longer entirely inside your reactions. You have a degree of perspective on them that the reactive mind, by definition, cannot have on itself. And from that perspective, something becomes visible that the reactive mind cannot see. The patterns, the automatic sequences of thought and feeling and behavior that have been running your experience without your awareness. The defenses you built so long ago that you no longer remember building them. The stories about yourself and the world that feel like facts because you have never examined them from outside their own frame. All of that becomes visible when you are in the observer state, not all at once, gradually. Layer by layer, each moment of genuine witnessing revealing something that the previous moment of reactivity had concealed. This is the quantum observer effect applied to consciousness itself. Each act of genuine observation changes what is observed. Not because you intend to change it, because observation and the thing observed are not as separate as they appear. Because the moment something in your own consciousness is truly seen, it cannot continue running exactly as it was. The automatic pattern requires invisibility to maintain its automaticity. Visibility disrupts it, not violently, precisely. And this is why the traditions that have pointed toward the Pleiades across 10,000 years, across every culture that has looked up at those 7 stars and felt something in the looking, have consistently framed the experience not as a gift received passively, but as a remembering that requires practice to stabilize. Not a transmission that arrives and transforms you, a quality of consciousness that you return to again and again until the returning becomes as natural as breathing. The ancient Maori, who built their agricultural calendar around the Matariki rising, were not simply tracking a star cluster for practical reasons. They were marking a time of return. A moment in the annual cycle when the cluster reappeared on the horizon before dawn, signaling not just the beginning of the new year, but a specific quality of attention that was called for. A time for gathering, for reflection, for looking clearly at what had been and what was coming. The Pleiades as a celestial clock for the practice of witnessing. Not a metaphor, a practice embedded in the structure of the year. The Lakota traditions surrounding the Pleiades similarly frame the star cluster not as a source of information, but as a focal point for a quality of attention. A place to direct the gaze when the quality of witnessing awareness needs to be recovered. Not because the stars themselves contain the awareness, because the act of looking at them, of directing attention outward towards something ancient and vast and beyond the ordinary concerns of daily life, has the effect of quieting the reactive mind and opening the witnessing state. The stars are not the source. They are the direction. The looking is the practice, and you can do it right now. Not at the Pleiades specifically, though if you have access to a clear night sky, that is worth doing. Right now, in this moment, you can direct your attention outward, past the screen, past the room, past the building, past the city, into the vastness that is always there, always present, always available, always unaffected by the noise of the reactive mind. You can feel, not metaphorically but physically, the smallness of the individual narrative in relation to the scale of what is actually there. And in that feeling of smallness, something paradoxical happens. The witnessing awareness, the observer, does not feel small, it feels vast. Because the observer is not the individual narrative, the observer is the space in which the individual narrative occurs. And that space has no edges. It does not shrink in the presence of the cosmos. It recognizes the cosmos as itself. That recognition, that's the transmission. That's what arrives not from 444 light years away, but from the deepest layer of your own awareness, when the reactive mind is quiet enough for it to be felt. And here's the final precise thing I want to say about the quantum field and this experience of recognition. In quantum field theory, there is a concept called vacuum fluctuation. The quantum vacuum, which sounds like empty space, is not empty. It is a seething, fluctuating field of virtual particles constantly appearing and disappearing, a ground state of activity that underlies all of physical reality. The vacuum is not nothing, it is the most fundamental something. It is the field from which all particles and all forces emerge, and to which they return. It is the substrate, the ground. And the quantum vacuum is non-local. Its fluctuations are correlated across space in ways that classical physics cannot account for. The Casimir effect, which is the measurable force between two uncharged metal plates placed very close together in a vacuum, is direct experimental evidence that the vacuum is not empty, but active, that the ground state of the quantum field has physical consequences that we can measure and predict. You are not moving through empty space. You are moving through a field that is continuously active at every point, that is non-locally correlated across its entire extent, that is the ground from which everything that exists emerges. You are not separate from that field, you are a pattern within it, a specific, temporary, coherent excitation of the same substrate that underlies the Pleiades and the space between them and everything else in the observable universe. When the reactive mind is quiet, when the witnessing awareness is active, when the observer state is inhabited rather than glimpsed, what becomes available is not contact with something outside you. It is recognition of the field you are already part of, the ground state of the universe, registering itself through the specific instrument of your consciousness. That is not a poetic description, it is the most precise description I can offer of what the convergence of quantum field theory and contemplative phenomenology is actually pointing at. The experience of cosmic recognition, of being seen by something vast, of contact with something that has been watching for a very long time, is the quantum vacuum recognizing itself through the aperture of a nervous system that has become quiet enough to stop generating and start receiving. The Pleiades are 404 light years away, but the field that connects you to them is not 444 light years wide. It is everywhere simultaneously. The distance is a feature of the pattern, not the ground. And when you access the ground, the distance collapses, not in the sense that you travel to the Pleiades, in the sense that the separation between you and the rest of the field, which was never absolute, becomes temporarily transparent. That transparency is the transmission. That's what you're here for. That's what drew you to this video, not information about star systems or quantum mechanics, though both of those have been useful tools in this conversation. The transparency itself, the moment of recognition, the quality of awareness that becomes available when you stop being entirely inside your own narrative long enough to feel the field you're embedded in. And that quality of awareness is not something that arrives once and stays. It is something you return to, again and again. In the middle of ordinary life, in the fraction of a second between stimulus and response, in the moment of stillness before the reactive mind generates its next thought, in the act of looking up at a night sky and feeling, before you can analyze it, the scale of what is actually there. Every return is the practice. Every moment of genuine witnessing is the transmission, not received from somewhere else, recognized in yourself, recognized as yourself. If this conversation is one you want to return to, watch it again in a moment when the noise of the day has settled, or when you notice yourself reacting instead of watching. Something different will be visible each time. And if there is someone in your life who has been avoiding something they already know they need to look at, send this to them. Not to convince them of anything, because sharing an act of looking creates a field between two people, one where each gives the other permission to see clearly And what becomes visible in that shared field is larger than what either observer could have reached alone. Something in the field of observers watching this right now is shifting, not because of a belief that was adopted, because of a quality of attention that was practiced. Because you are willing to look at the longing without filling it, to look at the anomalous experiences without filing them, to look at the question of consciousness and the quantum field without collapsing into certainty in either direction. That willingness, that quality of open, honest, unflinching attention is the transmission. It's not arriving from 444 light years away. It's arising in you right now as you watch. If something in this conversation landed in a way you weren't expecting, I want to know what it was. Not what you believed before you watched this, or what you believe now. What you saw, what shifted, what opened, what you recognized before your mind could catch up. Drop it in the comments. One word if that's all you have. A sentence, whatever is honest. Because the field of observers on this channel is not built on shared belief. It's built on shared willingness to look. And every honest observation you add to that field increases the clarity available to everyone who comes after you. The observer is the most powerful position in the universe. Not because it controls, because it sees. And what has been seen, truly seen, with the full quality of witnessing awareness, cannot go back to being invisible. You've been watching, you've been seen. That's enough. That's everything.